I'm going to give you the rundown really quickly on significant figures, otherwise known as Sig Figs. So normally we get hit with all of this stuff, and it's like, man, really? Because it's really a lot more simple than that. You don't have to look at memorize that whole chart of rules, because all it means is that any zero that's at the beginning of any number doesn't count. And any zero that is at the end of a number without a decimal doesn't count. And that's it. That's it. So if you have a zero at the end of a number, but it does have a decimal point, then it does count. If you have a zero that's in between two other numbers, that does count. So here's a decimal. So here's a zero in between two other numbers, so that counts. And there's a decimal, so that means the end zero also counts as well. Here's another one. There's a zero in between two numbers, that counts. There's a decimal, so that counts, the zero at the end. Here is 102. So this zero is in between two other numbers, so yes, that counts. And just like I had previously written, let's rewrite this real quick. 1020, there is no decimal here. No decimal. So that means the end zero doesn't count. So let's go back again. There's a decimal here, right? Okay. So that means the ending zeros are going to count. And of course, any number that's not a zero always counts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 always counts. It's just a couple of zeros that don't count. So if there's a decimal, if there is a decimal, then the end zero does count. So yes. Now this is a 2. So of course a non-zero number always counts. Yes. A zero in between the two other numbers counts. Yes. And this 1 counts. Yes. Just this zero at the very beginning never counts. Beginning zeros never count. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 sig figs in this number. Let's look at this next one. The 1 always counts. There is a decimal, so the end zero always counts. And of course, middle zeros and other numbers always count. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sig figs. Now let's look at this next one. 1 counts. A zero in between two other numbers count. This 2, of course, counts. And there is a decimal, so it does count. So there's 4 here. Now let's look at 102. 1 counts. A zero in between two numbers count. The 2 counts. But there's no decimal. So, and there's nothing else here. So we just have 3 sig figs. Now let's look at this number. 1 counts. A zero in between two numbers count. 2 counts. But there's this ending zero right here, right? And there's no decimal. So if whatever zeros are at the end, if there's no decimal, then it does not count. So that means there's 3 sig figs here. Everything counts. Everything is a significant figure. The only time you say, no, that's not a significant figure, is beginning zeros, which we don't have any on this page, okay? And then the only other time you do not count numbers as significant is when it's zeros at the end no decimal. And that's it. That is the only time you say that's not significant. So with this first one, 10.20. Well, there is a decimal, right? So we are going to count this ending 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sig figs. What about this next one? Well, is there a decimal? Yes. So you do count this ending 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sig figs. What about this next one? Is there a decimal? Yes. So you are going to count all these zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 sig figs in this. What about the next one? Is there a decimal? No, there's no decimal. So we are not going to count any of the ending zeros. So this 1,020,000 number only has 1, 2, 3 sig figs to it because there's no decimal, so you don't count any of the ending zeros. But that's it. Those are the only times you do not count zeros. Beginning zeros and zeros at the end with no decimal. So let's look at some examples with zeros at the beginning that you do not count. Okay, now look at this. Nobody writes numbers like this. If the number is 123, nobody is going to write 0, 1, 2, 3. So obviously this 0 has nothing to do with anything. So no, you don't count it. Like 0.00123. Any beginning zeros do not count. Ever, 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 ever. Next one, 0.01230. No beginning zeros. They never count. But we have a decimal. So this ending 0 counts. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sig figs. The top one. 1, 2, 3. 3 sig figs. Now this bottom one, 123. 1, 2, 3. 3 sig figs. And again, one more time. What about 1,230? Well, there's no decimal, right? No decimal, no ending 0. So that would only have 3 sig figs. So when you're doing sig figs is all the figures, all the digits, all the numbers, except 2 things. Any beginning zeros, 0.016 just has this 1 6 that counts. So that's 2 sig figs. And here's beginning zeros, 0.0160. The 160 counts. You just don't count the beginning zeros. So that's 3 sig figs. And then the only time you don't count the end zeros is when you have no decimal. So 1,020 is just going to be these numbers. You just don't count the end zeros because there's no decimal. So that's 3 sig figs. If it was 102.0, there's a decimal there, right? So that would be 4 sig figs. And that's it. So the only time you do not count the numbers is all the beginning zeros, and only when there's no decimal, you just don't count the end zeros. And that is it. Which is so much better and an easier way to describe it than all of these. I mean, please do read these rules. You're supposed to. But when you read these rules, you realize it's saying it way too complicated, because these are all pointing to the same 2 rules. Only 2 rules. No beginning zeros and no ending zeros if no decimal. That's it. everything else counts.